I'm just going to introduce myself a little bit. My name is Jenny Thompson. I'm with the UW Extension. I'm in plant sciences, and I'm one of the state extension horticulturists. And it is my very big honor this evening to have Tara Costanzo. So I first met Tara when she was with the Wyoming State Forestry. And so she's moved on and she's now with the International Society of Arboriculture, which she'll talk to you about a little more. But before we do that, I just want to mention a couple of housekeeping things. This is a Zoom webinar, so it's a little different than some other Zooms you might have been on where we can't chat. Instead, if you want to ask a question, you should be able to find a little Q&A button or box on your device. Just poke that and type in your question, and I'll be watching the questions and I'll pass them on verbally to Tara at the right time. I think another thing we would request is that at the end you might see a little evaluation form pop up, and I will put a little link in the chat. If you could fill that out, I would be deeply grateful. We want your input on what went well and what didn't, and what you want us to do next. So welcome. Thank you all for spending your part of your evening with us. So Tara, I think I'll turn it over to you and let you introduce yourself a little more thoroughly.
Thanks, Jenny. All right, I'll go ahead and share my screen. Let's see, make sure that that's the right one. Does that look good?
Yep, it's up. Looks good.
Okay, so thank you for having me today. We're going to talk about how to identify conifers in Wyoming. There we go. As Jenny said, my name is Tara Costanzo. I use the pronouns she, her. I am the outreach and education lead with the International Society of Arboriculture. I'm a certified arborist as well as tree risk assessment qualified. I have a master's degree in forest science and a bachelor's degree in landscape horticulture, both from Colorado State University. And my experience with Wyoming trees, I've been a Wyoming master gardener and an instructor for the Wyoming Naturalist Program and BioBlitz events. As Jenny mentioned, I did work for Wyoming State Forestry Division as the Urban and Community Forestry Program Manager and Community Resource Forester from 2016 to 2022. And during that time, I also was on the Wyoming Project Learning Tree Steering Committee. So I've had some experience teaching about trees in Wyoming. Today's presentation is going to include an overview of what ISA does, very briefly, surface level information, and then why you're really here, conifer identification. I did set up a Google Drive folder that has some presentation handouts for you. I will also include the slide presentation notes and everything too after we're done. So that hopefully you'll stick around to get that information as well. This presentation is designed for both beginners and advanced practitioners, and questions, again, are welcome in the Q&A chat. So please feel free to enter those as you will, and Jenny will pass those along at the appropriate time. But there should be plenty of time at the end for Q&A. So quick overview of ISA. Our mission statement is through research, technology, and education, the ISA promotes professional practice of arboriculture and fosters a greater worldwide awareness of the benefits of trees. We are a international nonprofit. It was founded in 1924, and we currently have over 24,000 members across the world. We are governed by a board of directors, which is comprised of 13 directors plus a president and a president-elect. We have volunteer committees for the board committees as well as operational committees. And then our ISA staff to actually run the ISA operations. We have around 40 full-time and part-time staff, as well as a couple of interns, which we've started having interns the last couple of years, which has been really great to have some educational staff is providing opportunities for students to learn during internships. But our service includes credentialing, member services, marketing and events, financial services, human resources and people services, and educational products and services, which is the team that I work on, the EPS team.
So your
Um,
mission is all about trees, right?
yes. Yep.
Mm, very cool.
Our CEO and executive director is Caitlin Paulahan, and the current board president is Sharon Jean-Philippe, who's a professor of urban and community forestry at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. So, ISA is the premier nonprofit that provides credentialing for professional tree care folks, and the benefits of being an ISA credential holder is that credentials verify that you have the knowledge and skills to provide proper tree care by demonstrating your professional expertise. It shows your dedication to the profession by earning and maintaining a credential. It reflects your commitment to ongoing education and the high standards that we uphold. And you're contributing positively to our community, and it helps to enhance your career growth and credibility. These credentials signal to employers and clients that you're experienced, reliable, and committed to best practices, and opens the door for advancement in our growing industry. So, we have a number of credentials, including certifications as well as qualifications, and these badges are just a few of the ones that we have. So certified arborist, urban forest professional, which is was formerly the municipal specialist, and the certified tree climber was formerly the tree worker climber specialist. And then the tree risk assessment qualification is a qualification versus a certification. Being a member of the ISA has its benefits as well. You can see these bullet points. You gain access to subscriptions for our publications, our journals, such as the Arborist News and Arboriculture and Urban Forestry. You also gain access to online content, such as newsletters and continuing education resources. You gain access to reduced prices at events and educational courses, workshops, and ISA merchandise. You can access career tools such as job listings and posting your resume. And then also just being a part of a worldwide network, which fosters the collaboration, peer learning, and keeping pace with, again, our growing industry. So connecting to other arborists around the world. And then locally, Wyoming is a part of the Rocky Mountain chapter, which is a four-state, multi-state chapter, which includes Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. It hovers around 1,000 members. And our executive director is Kelly Apodaca, and the Wyoming state director is Wendy Clements. If you're interested in taking a look at what Rocky Mountain Chapter does, events, and resources that are available, you can take a look at the isarmc.org website for more information. So with that very surface level introduction to ISA, let's go ahead and get into learning about identifying trees. So I really love this expression of what trees are. They're some of the largest and most impressive plants in the world, not only because of their size, but because of how old they can be, the different shapes that they can take on, and how they dominate their community, their plant community. I think they're beautiful. I hope that you find them beautiful in all different parts of the season that they are fruiting, putting leaves out, flowering. Um, we utilize them in so many different respects, but I find trees inspirational, and this quote just kind of encapsulates all of that. So, um, this quote is from the book Trees by Andreas Bartels. Um, yeah, I just think that it's a really great quote. So, starting out, what is a tree? There's not really a standardized definition of what a tree is, but if you think about just in general of what a tree is, we know that it is a perennial plant. It's a woody plant, typically having a single stem or a trunk, and usually it's taller than 15 feet at maturity. But with any rule or definition, there's usually an exception to that, right? So shrubs can also be perennial single stem plants. They can also reach over 15 feet. Um, and then there are trees that are smaller than 15 feet. They can be multi-stem. So there's always some gray area with how you define anything in biota. So, but in general, this is how we would define a tree. And in studying trees, the study of trees is called dendrology. But what makes trees important? Why are they important? The importance of trees to the world, including humans and the rest of our ecology, is that they are a source of food, shelter, shade, wood products. They provide oxygen through photosynthesis. They absorb carbon dioxide. They protect against erosion. They expand our appreciation as they play a key role as a woody plant. And by learning their identity and the relationships throughout their life history and habitats across the distribution that they range and their uses, we can learn and have a greater appreciation of these giant plants that keep us sheltered and safe and provide us with so many resources. Understanding these components of what makes plant grow, um, there are, of course, different factors that play into growing plants in general. Um, and as Jenny said earlier, maybe we should have had a competition of wind speeds today. But some of the growth factors that play a role in how trees grow. We know that it's Wyoming. Well, the Rocky Mountains in general are a tough place to grow trees, and trees have to be tough to grow in Wyoming. We have to think about temperature, which plays into the hardiness zones, the range that of temperatures that trees can grow in. What kind of light is available for trees to grow in? Is it going to be full sun situation, part sun, or is it going to be growing in the shade? What elevation are you growing at? Wyoming ranges from 3,100 to 13,000 feet in elevation. What aspect are you facing? Are you on a northern aspect, which has more moisture? Are you on a southern aspect, which is drier and warmer? Thinking about those can also play into drainage. What does the slope look like? Are you on a really steep slope? Are you on a flat plain? That also plays into how much moisture you're going to have. Is it dry? Is it wet? What does the soil composition look like? Are you working with high pH? We know that Wyoming typically has high alkaline soils. What does the soil texture look like? We know that Wyoming has pretty clay, rocky, hard soils, but there's also pockets of sandy soils. So what kind of soil texture are you looking at? And then there we go. What is the wind situation? We know we need to have trees that can whip around, or we need to use stakes to keep trees in place. just because of the wind factor. So these are all growth factors that we have to take in consideration when we're looking at trees, because they can have an impact on how the trees are going to grow. And why does identification matter? Well, I can tell you that improper ID leads to incorrect pruning and care decisions. And I'm sure many of you have heard the right tree, right place. Um, Correctly identifying a tree is essential for diagnosing issues and making those informed care decisions. So, if we know what tree it is, it helps to eliminate certain pests and the care that's going to be needed if you have a disease or a pest. Proper identification is needed for legally applying chemicals. The label is the law when it comes to pesticide application. Identifying skills can be taught, of course, but to be really, really good at identifying trees, it takes practice, it takes time, it takes repetition. So I'm going to talk about a lot of things today. And, I've had, oh gosh, I've had over 15 years of experience of identifying trees. Um, and if I really want to, that's since I took dendrology. Since I took my first tree identification class with Dr. Klett, that's actually going on like 22 years.
Time
So,
flies.
yeah, um, I've been identifying trees for quite a while. So if this is your first time learning about how to identify trees, don't worry about it. Like you'll get the practice. You have time to learn about it.
And one of the great things about identifying conifers is we can do it year round.
Yeah. Okay. So the basics. We already know we're talking about conifers. So we're looking at gymnosperms, so cone-bearing trees. We can already toss out the angiosperms. Angiosperms are broadleaf trees that have fleshy fruits. So seeds that are encased by a fruit, an ovule. Um, and so that already makes identifying conifers much easier. But our basics, we're looking at needles or scale and all shaped leaves. Um, Identifying if they're single or if they're in a bundle, if they're sharp or if they're soft and flexible, that'll play into helping you to identify what kind of conifer. Taking a look at the cones. Are they sitting upright on the branch or are they hanging down from the branch? Excuse me. That'll help you to narrow down the range of species that we're looking at. Taking a look at the bark. Is it smooth and covered in lenticels or resin blisters? Or is it rough and platy? Or is it exfoliating? That helps to narrow down the species that you're looking at. Does it have a scent? What shape does the tree look like? All these factors help to play into your identification. So, all right. If we're looking at our trees with needles, this narrows down to a few different potential trees that we're looking at. We're going to start with spruce trees. We've got a lot of S words that are associated with spruce. They're singly attached, they're square in cross section, they tend to be stiff and sharp, and they're sitting on pegs called sterigmata. So if you take a look at this picture, we're looking at the far left box. I've got a picture of a twig with the leaves on it. And just to the right of that one is a twig where you can see those sterigmata, those little pegs that are on the branch. Um, those are called sterigmata. And I mean, I have one here, but I don't know if you, my box is really, really small. So just look at the pictures on the screen. Um, The stegmata, or those little pegs, are going to really narrow it down to spruce. None of the other conifers that we're looking at today have those little pegs on it. So when you're looking at spruce, you can think sharp, square spruce. And if you can remember stegmata, um, that'll help you narrow it down to spruce. For our firs, so we're looking at that middle box on the screen. Those are our friendly flat firs, or flat friendly firs. A lot of F words there. I feel like I'm saying bad words, but I'm not. Um, so our firs tend to be soft. They're gentle to touch because the needles are flat. If you try to roll a fir needle between your fingers, you're gonna have a really hard time because they're flat. And they are directly attached to the stem. So if you take a close look at the middle box with the image on the left this time, you'll see that there's a circle on that twig. Um, and when I was learning about these trees, my instructor, Rocky Coleman, he liked to call that a toilet plunger. If you think about a round toilet plunger just attached to the twig, that's kind of how that looks on the stem there. Um, but that attachment, since the leaf is directly attached to the twig without a peg or anything, that's called sessile. That's sessily attached to the stem there. So we've got our sharp square spruce and our flat friendly firs. And next we have our pines. So we're looking at the box on the far right. These needles are in bundles, or what we call fascicles. And they come in bundles of 2, 3, or 5 for our pines here in the Rocky Mountains. Um, if you take a look at the image on the far right, you'll notice at the base, there's kind of that papery wrapping around the base of the needles. And if you want to, you could think of that as like a paper package. And pines come in packets. So there's a little mnemonic for you. Pines are in packets or bundles, um, or if you want to use the botanical term, fascicles. So pines are in packets. So square or sharp square spruce, flat friendly fir, pines in packets.
So if we're out and about looking around and we come across a conifer and it has the
Hmm.
needle singly attached, one of the
Yeah,
first things I like to do is pull it off and roll it around in my fingers. That
yeah,
really helps narrow it down. Those are
yeah,
great word things to help remember.
yeah. All right. So moving on to the next one, we're going to take a look at cones. So our spruce cones are papery. They're not like super thin or anything, but if you kind of stroke a spruce cone, they feel kind of papery compared to the other cones that we're going to talk about. They hang from the tree pointing downward, so they're pendulous. So they're hanging kind of like not off a string or anything, but they're hanging down like a pendulum is hanging. Um, they are kind of ragged on the tips of the scales, the cone scales. And this image here is showing you a Colorado spruce or blue spruce, however you want to refer to it, Colorado blue spruce, if you want to put it all together. Um, so that's a quintessential spruce cone there. The next cone in that second to the left is a fir cone. Um, the funny thing about fir cones is they tend to grow to the top of the tree only, and they're deciduous. So they actually fall apart. So it's really hard to actually find an intact cone. And so just to the right of that image is the remains of a cone that's fallen apart. So that's the cone stalk. Um, and that's usually what I find on a tree, unless it's a really small tree that I can actually reach a cone. Um, I actually was able to find an immature cone that had not fallen apart yet. Um, but the cool thing about fir cones is they stand up. upright on the branch. Um, and for us here in Wyoming, um, firs are the only ones that have the upright cones. There's other species that have upright cones, but for us here, our true firs are the ones that have the upright cones.
So they always remind me of little candles on a birthday cake. So they're all
Yeah,
looking
yeah.
up.
So you can think about that. Um, for our pine cones, um, these are, you know, I always I always end up correcting people, but anytime people call this a pine cone, um, or this a pine cone, I'm like, actually, that's a spruce cone. I don't mean it to be mean or anything, but it's like you're actually looking at a spruce tree, not a pine tree. But pine cones are woody and they're pretty rigid. Um, this one in particular is a ponderosa cone, and that just in the image that's on the screen there, that's a ponderosa pine cone. Um, there, I don't really want to crush this in my hand or anything, but if you find a cone and it's pretty sturdy, um, it's most likely a pine cone versus like your spruce cone. You could really actually just like smash that in your hand. You're probably not going to do that, especially with a ponderosa cone because it has an armed umbo. So what is an umbo? An umbo is the raised, often hardened terminal point or knob on the tip of an individual scale. So the prickle that's on the tip of each of the cone scales, that's the umbo. And not all pines have an armed umbo, but ponderosas have pretty sharp spikes on their cones. So, if you ever get in a fight with somebody and you've got ponderosa pine cones, you could like throw one at them and they probably won't really like that. Um, that's a good size cone for our conifers out here. So woody cones on our pines, they're either armed or unarmed. And then for our junipers, people love to call them berries, but they are a cone and um, just refer to them berry-like. And of course, a lot of people's favorite spirit or libation is flavored with juniper berries or juniper cones. Um, of course, talking about gin. So if folks aren't aware, typically they're using the ground juniper or Juniperus communis um, cones. So there you go. Junipers have berry-like cones. All right. So one of the resources in that Google folder that I shared in that QR code has this conifer comparison chart. So here's a resource for you, just a general overall conifer comparison chart of the items that we've already talked about. So I'm not going to spend too much time on here, but this is available for you in that Google form or in that Google folder. A list of, oh, my microphone changed. Can you all hear me? Am I still doing
Yep,
okay?
I can still hear you. It
Okay.
shifted a little bit, but we can
Okay.
still hear you fine.
Okay, good. Here's a list of the native conifers that we're going to talk about today. And then I'll have another list of the landscape conifers after we go through the natives. Uh, Rocky Mountain juniper, the leaves are scale-like, tend to be blue-green in color. The cones are berry-like and mature to bright blue. They do tend to have that, um, what is it? The whitish bloom on them, and that's just a protective coating, a waxy bloom on them. And then the bark is fibrous and shredding. So you can find Rocky Mountain juniper at our nurseries. They come in all different colors, ranging from like a silvery blue green all the way to like this medium green and in all different shapes to fit your landscape. But our native Rocky Mountain juniper tends to be a small tree, um, upright growth form. For our native firs, there's two of them. We've got the Abies concolor, white fir. They both have very similar leaf structure. Um, so white fir versus subalpine fir, where you're really going to notice the difference is in their overall form. You'll notice on the image on the left, it's a very full kind of pyramidal shape versus the image on the right, it's a very narrow spire-like shape. Um, the leaves on the white fir, if you crush them, they have a citrus smell. And then the subalpine fir, um, the cones are really pretty purple when they're young. Um, and then, as I mentioned, they're growing up towards the top of the tree and they fall apart typically before you really get a chance to see them. Um, but I will mention that the squirrels really love them. And so sometimes you can find um, the the cone stalks on the ground because the squirrels have bitten off the tips of the branches that they're on. So those are our native firs. And then Douglas fir, which is not a true fir. Um, and you can know from the name that it's not a true fir because pseudotsuga means false hemlock. Um, and then the species name in ZCI is this tree was named after the gentleman who named it. Um, and then also with the common name Douglas fir, it has that hyphen in there that is indicative of a tree that is, it means that it's not truly a fir. So we'll have another couple of trees that also have indicators that it's not a true um, species that falls within um, that plant genus. So our Douglas fir, they do have flat needles that are soft. They radiate from around the twig. If you crush these needles, they have a sweet resinous or camphor-like smell. The really, really good identifier for these ones are the cones. They've got these three pronged bracts that look like mouse tails, like a mouse is trying to run up inside the cone. And then if you're trying to tell the difference between this tree and maybe a spruce, aside from the sterigmata, the buds are very different. They're pointed and they're not sticky, and they're reddish brown, um, and they're kind of cigar shaped. So that's our Douglas fir. And onto our native spruces, we've got Colorado spruce, Picea pungens, and then Engelmann spruce, Picea engelmannii. Um, can tell the difference really in kind of their shape. Engelmann spruce tend to be a little more upright and narrow versus Colorado spruce tend to be more full. Um, And with the Colorado spruce, they can range anywhere from this light silvery gray color all the way to a medium green color. Um, what you find in the landscape nursery business, um, they can range in any shape and form from like Fat Albert, which is like a dwarf shape, and then really globose ones, so very round. They almost kind of look like cactus forms, but um, Picea pungens comes in a lot of different varieties and cultivars.
You bet. It makes it a little confusing when you're in landscapes to pick them out.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but if you were looking at a green Colorado spruce right next to an Engelmann spruce, the way to tell the difference is that the twigs, the younger twigs on the Engelmann spruce are hairy. They have really fine pubescence on them. And I do have an image of that side by side a little bit later in the presentation so that you can see what the difference looks like on those. And then another native spruce that we have in Wyoming is the Black Hill spruce, which is a subspecies of a white spruce. It's more of a geographical subspecies that just grows in the Black Hills. So this tree is just like a really compact form. It looks kind of like a Colorado spruce. The needles are a little bit shorter, but how I really tell the difference, the cones. The cones look pretty different. They're a lot smaller. They tend to be more of like a medium brown versus that like tannish brown. And then the edges of the cones are more flattened and less jagged. So that's that's how I tell the difference between these trees. Um,
I
and
think those have some of the prettiest cones on spruces, I think. The way they're
yeah,
scalloped, they're so beautiful. We
I
have
really
a couple of questions that have come in for you on
okay.
a variety of things when you're ready
Yeah,
to field
please.
those.
Yeah.
The first one came in when you were talking about pines and,
Okay.
and pine cones, and we'll get back to that in a minute. But there are, you mentioned that they are armed. Somebody was asking what you meant by that.
Oh, they
Or
have a
how.
they have like a spike on them.
Mhm. And then that somebody else wanted you to go ahead and put up the QR code again at the end and then the link so that folks can access that folder. And then we have a question that has to do with the woody encroachment of grasslands and junipers. So maybe you want to field that one a little bit later.
Okay. Yeah. Um, the QR code is going to come up again at the end of the presentation. I've got that for you. Um, encroachment.
So here's the question. I guess I'll go ahead and read it. So the person asking the question said, "I grew up in Nebraska and hear a lot about woody encroachment of grasslands. My understanding is that most those are mostly eastern red cedars that have quote unquote escaped from captivity and planted windbreaks. But I'm curious, does something similar happen with Rocky Mountain junipers invading grasslands in Wyoming?"
Ooh.
You can save that for later if you're going to talk about junipers later.
Well, I mean, I'm going to talk about a lot of the native species again, but you know, so a lot of wildlife professionals talk about juniper encroachment. I think they're really more so talking about like the eastern red cedar because that does tend to be um, I think more in the plains versus the mountains. But that's not to say that the Rocky Mountain juniper doesn't get down into the plains either. Um, one perspective that I really liked, more so coming from a forester background, is that the encroachment could actually should well I don't know if you should say should, but you can think of it more as natural succession is just that, you know, our plant communities evolve and, you know, it's just that our plants, the trees grow and they're going to be taller than the grasses around them. And so it's not necessarily encroachment, it's just the natural succession of that plant community. Um, and so that's just another perspective or a different way to think about it. Um, so yeah,
Yep, great. I
does that
appreciate you tackling that hard one right from the beginning.
are native pines. I've grouped them by the number of needles, just so that they're grouped in some way. So starting off with our five needle pines, we've got our white bark pine and we've got our limber pine. White bark pine is pretty special. It's a high elevation tree. The cones on these trees, they disintegrate. they're deciduous. They fall apart when they fall to the ground. They are a high value tree because they provide a very nutritious food source to wildlife. However, um, they are very susceptible to the white pine blister rust, and so um, there are many conservation efforts out there to find these trees and find resistant specimens, collecting those cones and having a good crop to plant so that um, we can have that food source for grizzly bears, the nutcracker bird, and I forget which squirrel it is, but one of the squirrels. Um, and so um, it's a very precious resource that there are a lot of conservation efforts out there for. However, this isn't a species that is grown in a residential landscape. Um, so yeah, but it is a five needle pine. It's got cool purple cones that fall apart. It's got distinctive pale, smoother bark when it's young. And I think you can kind of see the texture in the image on the left there. This is I believe it's the current champion tree in Wyoming. I had to go hike in the backcountry with somebody to find this tree near Lander. Um, so that's the current champion tree that I'm aware of. Um, and then with the limber pine, um, cool thing about these trees, they have very flexible twigs. I mean, flexible enough you can tie them in a knot. They do have large cones. They tend to be very sticky with resin, um, but the cones don't fall apart when they fall to the ground. I have a specimen here on my desk, and I wish I could show you, but I know my screen is really small. But I've got a nice specimen that's not too sticky, which is awesome for my collection because then I don't get sticky fingers. Um, but another five needle pine um, that's native to Wyoming. All right. Two needle pines, pinyon pine and lodgepole pine. Pinyon pines tend to look more like shrubs, but they can reach up to 30 feet tall. But they do tend to grow more in the multi-stem fashion. But these are cool trees because their cones are very different from the other cones. They're very thick scales and they produce large edible seeds that people utilize. Pine nuts, if you like to eat pine nuts, this is the tree that true pine nuts are coming from. Um, there's a lot of other species of pines that produce seeds that people eat, but pinyon pine is the quintessential pine nut species. Lodgepole pine, um, a very upright, thin, slender tree. It has serotinous cones, and so those are the cones that stay shut until a heat situation happens, and whether that's just a really, really hot day or if a fire event comes through, the resin will melt and then the seeds will fall out, and hopefully a new crop of trees will grow when those seeds drop. Um, but both of these trees have shorter um, needles in pairs of two. Um, but you've got a shorter tree versus a taller tree. And lodgepole, I wouldn't say it's necessarily the best for the residential landscape, but folks who like the native trees in their landscapes might like a lodgepole pine. It just doesn't necessarily have the most aesthetic form and shape. I think there's other trees out there that might look nicer. Um,
Tara, we have a question on going back to white bark pine. The
yeah.
question is, what altitude does white bark pine prefer, and why can't we grow it residentially in the mountains?
I don't think there's anything that says you can't grow it. Um,
I think it's just not often found in
yeah.
residential areas.
I think when I'm thinking of residential, I'm not necessarily thinking of high elevation residences. Um, if if uh if you are in a neighborhood that is like higher I guess I didn't really look up what the actual elevation ranges of um white bark pine. Wow. Okay. This says 4,300 to 12,000 feet, which is above the timber line. So, um, yeah, Northern Rockies, so BC, Alberta area, 65 to 7,500 feet. Wyoming, 8,000 to 10,000 feet in Wyoming. You'll probably just have an easier time growing if you're in that elevation range. Like I said, it's not unheard of. I'm sure you could, but again, it's very susceptible to that white pine blister rust, which is pretty prevalent. You can see a lot of dead and dying trees along I-80 that have been killed by white pine blister rust. So, um, especially between Cheyenne and Laramie, there's a lot of the limber pines, I believe, that were killed by that. What's next? All right, probably Ponderosa. Yeah, Ponderosa. So, um, Ponderosa pines, you're going to find bundles of twos and threes. Um, if a ponderosa is in a stress situation, so drought, potentially just higher elevation, for whatever reason, if it's planted in higher elevation, you're more likely to find bundles of two, just for um, reserving energy efforts. But you'll find bundles of twos and threes on ponderosa pine. Like I said before, the cones pretty good size cones. They're egg shaped. They've got that prickle or that armed umbo. Um, it's a pretty stout cone. Um, and if you pick it up, you're gonna probably know that you're picking up a ponderosa pine cone because you're likely gonna get pricked by one of the prickles on the cone scale. Um, Of course, it's got that beautiful orange bark, thick bark, thick orange plates of bark, and on nice, warm, sunny days, walk up to the trunk, put your nose right up against it, and smell the bark on ponderosa pines. You may smell vanilla, you might smell butterscotch, but it has a wonderful, nice aroma to it. Um, Compared to another orange bark tree that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But long needles, they can get up to 8 to 10 inches long. But yeah, looking at that image on the left there, this is just uh, in my yard here down in Thornton. Um, they're cool looking trees, and they can get really tall in prime conditions. Um, in their native range. I think they get up over 100 feet tall. They tend to have really broad, open canopies when they get really old and mature, which is really cool. But you can see like those big tufts of needles. They've just got really long needles on them. So, native trees by elevation. This is pulled from a Colorado Forest Restoration Institute paper. Um, I modified it a little bit so that we got the subalpine fir versus the white fir. Um, just because my experience in Wyoming, I didn't see white fir that often in the um, native range. I saw subalpine fir more often than I did white fir. But Here you can just kind of see we're starting in the pinyon juniper community, moving up to ponderosa, and then getting up into lodgepole pine mixed with some Douglas fir and Colorado spruce, and then moving up into our mixed conifers, which gets into the more of the Douglas fir, subalpine fir, um, and just moving up to timberline. Um, yeah, so and then change that around so that you're looking at different aspects. You'll notice that there's more diversity, and it's a thicker forest on the northern aspect just because there tends to be more moisture, more water availability due to the cooler shading effect versus the southern aspect where it tends to be drier and warmer. Um, the the forest floor tends to be a little bit clearer with respect to the elevation and the aspect of the slope.
That's a cool illustration. It really makes that point well that you see when you're out hiking and looking around. You can see
Yeah.
this very distinct way that the trees are placed in the landscape.
Hmm. All right. Here is the list of common conifers in our landscapes. Um, this includes both the natives and the ornamentals that we're going to talk about. Um, so you'll see it's a little bit longer, but I've taken out some of the natives that we just went over.
We have a couple of questions before you proceed. One of
Okay,
them is asking about limber pine. Does it need more shade to grow when younger?
more shade. Not necessarily. I've seen it in open full sun settings.
Yep, and when wildfire goes through it, is able to
Yeah.
recolonize fine.
Mhm.
And then just a couple of comments on white bark pine often has a somewhat gnarled looking, maybe a result of altitude and wind, and but maybe people don't prefer it in landscapes. So maybe that's part of why you don't see it so often, along with the disease issues.
Yeah.
That's it.
All right. Okay, so I've added two junipers to this list. So we've got Rocky Mountain juniper, then Chinese juniper, and Eastern red cedar. So here, just that side note about um the false plant names. Red cedar, even though it's a juniper, you'll notice that red and cedar are combined into one word. That usually indicates that it's a false something. So red cedar, it's a false cedar because it's combined with the word red. Um, just a little bit of fun taxonomy trivia there. Um, so if it's two words combined into one, or if it's got that hyphen, it usually indicates that it's not a true cedar, or in the case of the Doug fir, it's not a true fir. Okay, so the cool thing about Chinese juniper here, it's got all and scale foliage on the same plants. The cones can have up to 5 seeds in each one, and kind of like the um, Colorado spruce, it comes in all shapes and sizes. There are a ton of cultivars of Chinese um, juniper out there. So if you've got a really narrow um, alley between you and your neighbor, and you're looking for, a sound buffer or a visual buffer, this might be a good place to find a straight, narrow juniper um, or something like that. Um, there's probably an option for that out there. Um, Eastern red cedar turns bronzy in the winter. it has a cinnamon red shredding bark. And if you crush the leaves, it has a distinct cedar scent. So that's how you can kind of tell the difference between um, Eastern red cedar versus Rocky Mountain juniper. Um, I believe too that um, the Eastern red cedar cones develop in 1 year versus the other two develop in 2 years. I think that's on my next slide. Um, and then here is what the cones look like. Again, they all look fairly similar to each other. Um, I I don't know. I have a really hard time telling the difference between the junipers.
I'm glad to hear you say that. I do too.
Um, but in general, from all of my researching, is that the Rocky Mountain juniper, most of the time, it it has more of that silvery bluish tinge versus the Eastern red cedar is more of that greenish. And then the Chinese juniper, like I said, you can find it in almost any combination um, of all of the above. But it can have up to 5 seeds in those cones.
We had a question that came in and it has to do with hemlocks. So they're asking if there are any hemlocks in Wyoming that are native to here.
Um, So I think on the Idaho Wyoming border, there could be some hemlock um, growing there, but I you don't come across it. We just don't have the moisture. We don't have the
Hmm.
humidity for them. Um, so you're really not gonna see them in our residential landscapes unless somebody's got a really good micro climate going on, and probably along that like Idaho Green Valley um, part of the state.
Yeah, you really see a lot of them in that Pacific Northwest region of the United States. We have a couple of questions on junipers. One is, where could I see a Chinese juniper? So she's talking about some of the ones that you will see in landscapes now.
Okay. Um, this one is at the Heritage Arboretum at CSU.
Cool. Good reason to stop when
Um,
you're going through Fort Collins.
yeah. On So I took this picture, and directly behind me from where I was taking this picture is across the path a whole grove of more junipers. And again, in all different shapes and sizes and colors, and mixed in with Chinese junipers. Um, but if you can go to a nursery, um, you'll probably find one there just because like I said, there's a lot of variety, and so your local nursery will probably have this available.
We have another question. They're not sure what type of juniper they had, but some of the branches had the flat, soft scales, and some had horrible thorny branches. What are those thorny branches called or for?
The thorny branches, those
One,
like the awl shaped leaves. Um, these aren't the awl shaped leaves necessarily, but you can kind of see where this twig has started to turn brown and it's got that like spike coming off there. On that image of the conifer ID basics at the beginning of the slide, I had an image of awl shaped um, leaves. Um, I would go back, but that's like almost halfway to dentation. Um, so ground juniper. So Juniperus communis, or communis, however you want to pronounce it, has those all-shaped leaves, which is different from these scale-like leaves that that these ones have. Um, Usually on the younger branches is where you'll find those all-shaped leaves um, too. Um, but what does this say? This says that you'll find both of them on the Chinese. The leaves juniper, or sorry, juvenile all-like leaves are in whorls of three, and adult scale-like leaves are diamond-shaped in alternating pairs on the Chinese one, which is this one in the middle.
Dorothy, yeah, is saying that juvenile junipers often have those spiky alt-shaped leaves. So she's in agreement.
Yeah.
So we had a comment on the Utah junipers. Um, Donna is saying we have a colony of Utah juniper that were separated from the main colony in central Wyoming. I have
Mhm.
not seen them in landscapes. Do you know of any being grown for use in landscapes?
Um, the nursery guides that I look through don't usually have Utah juniper available in them. I don't know if that's because they're harder to propagate. Arborvitaes. My experience growing these has been they always get winter killed, but there can be those, again, microclimates where they grow really well. You're most likely going to find the Oriental arborvitae, and you may know them either as Thuja, so Thuja, orientalis, or Platycladus orientalis, um, depending on what book you're looking at. But I guess Platycladus is the most appropriate name as opposed to the Thuja um, genus. But these trees have flattened vertical sprays of leaves. Um, so you can see that like vertical orientation of the sprays versus a horizontal one, which would be um, a Chinese arborvitae. And then the cones, again, they kind of look like the juniper cones, but you can see they have a distinctive like horn, um, a couple of horns on them. And then these do mature into a woody um, cone if if you don't pick them off the tree and keep them in their immature state, like I did. So yeah, so they open up and they split open to release their seeds. But they do have an upright teardrop shape, and you can see that teardrop shape in the image here on the right. If you ignore that volunteer, I think that's a an elm, volunteer elm. Um, but a lot of people like to use these as hedges, um, and then mutilate them with their hedgers. Um, but they they work pretty well for privacy screens because they're dense. Um, and yeah, if you plant them close enough together, they'll form a nice fence for you. All right, so here is where you can see some of those more details about the true fir and the Douglas fir. Um, White fir is a nice large landscape tree, so if you've got the space, you can plant this tree. Again, um, it's got those upright deciduous cones, so they fall apart, and here's where you can see what that stalk looks like when it's left on uh, the twigs, and then again, directly attached to the twigs in that sessile attachment. And then on the Douglas fir, here's where you can see the leaf attaching to the twig. It's got that pinched base, and I've heard people say that this looks kind of like a hockey stick. So the leaves look kind of like hockey sticks. And then the cones. So here's a nice close-up of a Douglas fir cone. You can see that three-pronged bract. So that's a modified leaf. Um, I think it's actually a wing. But It looks like a mouse tail, like a mouse is running up underneath the scale of the cone. And then this tree had so many cones on it. So this isn't like dead tips or anything. These are all cones on this Douglas fir in somebody's front yard. So pretty cool. I don't know if this tree was just having like a masting year, or I guess it's possible it was stressed in this person's front yard, but pretty cool display of cones of a cone crop on that Doug fir. All right, so our landscape spruces again, Colorado spruce. Here's that cone, 2 to 4 inches long versus the Engelmann spruce, usually 1.5 to 2 inches long. These two photos were taken. It was one photo and then I cropped it, but these two cones were put next to each other. And then here's where you can see the pubescence on the Engelmann spruce twig. Um, all that the little fuzziness on the twig of the Engelmann spruce versus there's no hair on the Colorado spruce. Um, and sometimes you can still see some fuzziness on the second year growth too of the Engelmann spruce, but it's easier to see on the current year growth. Um, but that's if you have them like side by side in the landscape. And more likely than not, in a residential landscape, you're going to find Colorado spruce versus Engelmann spruce. Um, for the more ornamental ones, Norway spruce is pretty popular. Um, it's got kind of pendulous branchlets, so they all look like they're weeping branchlets. You can see that display, all the little twigs are just kind of hanging down. It's not because it's drought or it's wilting or anything. That's just the natural um, form that this tree has. And the cones are very large. They're the largest cones of the spruces that we have. Um, and even larger than the Colorado spruce. Um, these can get up to like 8 to 9. I think I even saw somewhere that said 10 inches long. Um, but they're pretty stout cones, very stiff, rigid cones. They're a little less, the scales themselves are a little less jagged um, than the Colorado spruce. Um, and yeah, I think the Norway spruce, it's a pretty cool looking tree.
Is
Um,
that the main way you tell them apart from the Colorado blue spruces, since there's so much variation among the Colorado blue? Is it mainly looking at the cones or the pendulous growth or
yeah,
something else?
um, I think the cones are the best way to tell the difference, just because sometimes you do see Colorado spruce that have kind of the upswept branches that make
Hmm.
things look like they're weeping, kind of. Um, but on the Norway spruce too, the needles are a little shorter and they're pointed towards the tip of the branch as opposed to on Colorado spruce. The needles come off more at that 90-degree angle typically,
Hmm.
which also plays into that. They've Colorado spruce leaves are very sharp and very stiff, very sharp.
Hmm.
So Colorado spruce is the sharpest of all of them. All these other ones are a little friendlier than the others, but they're all still pokey.
Hmm. Yep.
Um, and then here's the Black Hills spruce, has the much shorter needles. But you can see here too, these ones are coming off a little bit closer to that 90-degree angle. But that's not always a reliable identifier. Um, just sometimes the needles get pushed forward due to like snow or wind, so that can always influence things too. And then again, the small cones with the less um, jagged edges on those scales.
Great. We
Yeah.
have another question and a comment.
Okay.
Dorothy kicked in on the Utah juniper. They're the ones that have one seed in them. And so the Rocky Mountain often have more seeds. And then we have a question from Cynthia. She said she saw a tree where all the cones were in groupings of three. Can you tell by that what type it might have been?
Sorry, what was the first part of that? All
She said
the
that the tree, when she was looking at the tree, all the cones look like they're in groupings of three, like three cones together.
um I haven't heard anything about identifying trees based on the number of cones that they have.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm not sure that you could if you can use that as a reliable identifier.
Yep.
Five needle pines are eastern white pines. Um, they're just really soft and fluffy looking. The needles are very flexible. They're fairly long compared to the other five needle pines that we're going to look at. Um, the cones um, are pretty delicate looking, again, compared to the other five needle pines that we're going to look at. They do have this distinctive curve to them as well. And this picture is of the a cone that I picked up off the ground. I didn't pick it off the tree, from the champion eastern white pine in Buffalo, Wyoming. So pretty cool. It's about, I don't know, that one's probably close to 9 inches long. So pretty long cone. But you can see on here that it's an unarmed umbo. So there's no spike on there. Um, and five needle pines, kind of like oaks, they how we have groups of red oaks and white oaks. Five needle pines are white pines, so they all can be kind of grouped into one group like that. But this is Pinus strobus is eastern white pine. Next up, bristlecone pine, and then limber pine. Bristlecone pines, very distinctive. The leaves look like they are a part of a bottle brush. They have white resin flecks on them, and the cones have a very long bristle on the tip. Um, so they do have a spine on them, but it's more just like a bristle, given the name bristle cone. Um, and typically more of an ornamental specimen tree, um, more than anything. They, I wouldn't say they have any sort of necessarily distinct form or shape. Um, they're just really cool trees. One of my favorites. And then the limber pine, um, again, very kind of wispy looking. They have a little bit longer needles, but again, really soft, friendly bundles of five. And again, those larger resinous cones, um, unarmed umbo, so there's no spike on that one. But it looks very different from the eastern white pine cone. Um, so again, very flexible twigs where you can tie them in a knot. Back to our two needle pines, again, our pinyon pine, um, again, with the really thick uh, scales on the cones with the large seed. Um, two needles, they can grow up to the 30 feet in height, versus a mugo pine, which is a European species. Two needles, they um, this one was probably around 10 feet tall, um, but more of that shrub form, but they can definitely grow into a small sized tree. Um, what does this one say? 1 to 2 inch needles. They're twisted and dark green. So looking at the needles, they tend to have a bit of a twist to them, and they do have a prickle on the scale. Mostly you're probably going to find this as a shrub form more so than a tree, but that doesn't mean there isn't that exception to the rule. Very common Austrian pines, longer needles. Um, more likely than not, you may confuse this with a ponderosa pine, but bundles of two only. They don't have a sharp prickle on the cone. Um, I think it's fairly distinctive, the whorled branching on Austrian pines, but they do have very silver gray bark with dark furrows in the bark. Um, and but versus Ponderosa has that very orange bark with the vanilla butterscotch smell. And then Bosnian pines, very dense, medium length needles. And this is a very small Bosnian that was in a nursery, but they have these blue purple cones. And here's one where you can see kind of in a bundle of three. But again, I don't think that that's an identifier. But it has very white buds that'll elongate to release those needles. Um, what
So the
else?
barks on a lot of trees can be very useful in identification, but I think I forget to mention when I'm talking to folks about ID that barks can change quite a bit, especially on the conifers as they get older, like the
Yes.
very young conifers versus the older one. It changes quite a bit. So it's
Yeah.
something to keep in
A lot
mind.
of them start out fairly smooth and then become more um, plated or exfoliating. Here is again one where they both have orange bark, um, and where you can tell the difference is that like Scotch pine has shorter needles, it has exfoliating bark versus large plated thick bark. The bark on Scotch pine or Scots pine, however you want to say it, um, is fairly thin, um, and it has much shorter needles. Um, you, one of the things that I look at when I identify trees, especially at a distance, is like the texture of a tree. So like ponderosas look fluffy and puffy versus this looks more dense, kind of like, I don't know, uh, or like a flower of some sort versus this just looks like a fluffy brush. Um, but yeah, and then you've got your bundles of twos and threes, very long needles versus shorter needles on the Scots pine.
And it seems like when I've looked at Scots pines, their needles aren't in a night. They're kind of like a crazy hair day kind of needle arrangement, whereas the ponderosas seem to be more straight in a line and controlled.
Yeah,
I think is interesting.
yeah. And then we've got our folks that don't fall in line with everybody else. There are just these trees drop their leaves in the fall. Um, European larch is most likely what you're going to find. Um, it turns this beautiful golden orangey yellow color. It has these little spurs that the leaves come out of, 15 to 30 leaves out of one of those spurs. And then the cones look like roses and they persist on the branch. So when you find one and the cones are mature, um, they just look like little flowers on the branch. Versus the bald cypress. Um, these leaves look like feathers, and the cones are just kind of these round balls that do open up to release the seeds. One of the interesting things that I found out a year or two ago is that bald cypress is actually susceptible to Japanese beetle. I didn't
Really?
know.
Yeah.
But feather-like, if you happen to run across a dawn redwood next to a bald cypress, um, the way to tell them apart is that a bald cypress has alternate leafing arrangement versus opposite leafing arrangement on the dawn redwood. So that's how you tell the difference with those.
Interesting. They have one of those European larches in one of the parks in Laramie, and they have a big sign by it that says what it is and the fact that it loses its leaves in the winter, because I think they get a lot of calls each year that it's dying. So
Yeah.
they're supposed to lose their needles.
Yeah. So again, I've made some comparison charts for you so that you can have a cheat sheet for your junipers, for your spruces, and then for your 2 and 3 needle pines and your 5 needle pines. And these will be in that Google Drive for you. Um, and you'll notice that on these, there's some key stress issues. So we'll quickly talk about some common pest issues. For pines and spruces, Ips beetle is a major pest. A lot of trees lose the tops of their trees. That's a pretty identifying feature of Ips beetle. They kill from the top down by essentially girdling the tree under the bark from chewing the vascular system under the bark. Coulee spruce gall is found on spruce trees caused by an adelgid, which is somewhat similar to an aphid. Um, it looks kind of like a cone on the tips of the branches when they dry out, which you can see on this image in the right is an older one. The image in the middle is an immature um, gall. It's mostly an aesthetic issue, but if somebody feels so inclined, they can go and hand prune them out, but it's not necessarily going to kill the tree. Um, Juniper rusts, if there is a tree or shrub of the rose family, the junipers will likely get some of these rusts of the Gymnosporangium species. They do require the two hosts, and it's a 2 year disease cycle. Um, they just look very alien and might surprise some people. This orange thing is kind of gelatinous, and that's releasing spores. For the rest, um, yeah, so this is like a knot rust. And I think this is just like the dormant uh after it's released the spores. Um, Pine wilt, I can't say 100% that that's what happened to this tree, but it's what I think happened to this tree, that this beetle bit this tree, delivered the pine wilt nematode, the Bursephalanchus xylophilus, um, and then that nematode spread the pine wilt and killed this tree. But yeah, um, initially they thought that the exotic pines like the Austrian, the Scots pine, the Bosnian pines were the only ones susceptible to pine wilt, but now they're finding it in the native species. So if you happen to see a pine tree fading very quickly, and by fading I mean they go from green to this uh, uh, tan color within a matter of like a month or two, it probably has pine wilt. So kind of sad that that happens. But there's information about this on the tree symptom decoder on the Wyoming State Forestry Division site. So I'll have a link for that too. Using identification tools. Again, it's important to make sure you know what tree you're looking at to help narrow down pest and disease issues. I'm going to go through some tools and resources that you can use. Here is the Biodiversity Institute tool key. Using a dichotomous key, you start at the top, read through the first pair of contrasting statements, choose the one that best fits what your specimen looks like. Don't overthink it. You're going to get more detailed as you go through each of the questions. And choose the one that best describes your specimen, follow the directions, and proceed through until you get to how you've identified your specimen. This is a great resource for these specific trees. A lot of them are on here. Again, this will be in that Google Drive folder. Um, there is a native tree key that I helped to build for the Wyoming Naturalist Program. It's on the Wyoming State Forestry Division Community Forestry page. Um, I was going to go through this with you, but I don't think we have time for that. But you can Google native or Wyoming native tree key and find it, or just go to the Wyoming State Forestry Division website, go to Community Forestry, Educational and Technical Resources webpage, scroll down until you find it. And then you can also see here is that tree symptom decoder. You can click on either of those tools um, and use those to identify what's going on. Um, and then, like I
And I
said, oh,
also
sorry,
put a link within the chat to that one. So folks
awesome.
want to copy and paste it out of the chat. It's in there.
Yeah. Um, Again, very cool. This has pictures in it so that it can help you identify what you're looking at. And there is a downloadable print version available. Please note the number of pages that these documents are. The full key is 186 pages. The conifer only one is 47 pages. So it's not a small print job. um, there are identification apps out there. iNaturalist is great. Seek by iNaturalist is geared more towards kids, but it looks like a lot of fun. And then there's other ones. VTree is by Virginia Tech. Um, it's pretty good. Leaf Snap, picture this. I think you have to pay to use those. PlantNet, I haven't had much time to explore that one.
I
But
use it. It's pretty reasonable on domestic trees.
okay, it looks all right. Google Lens is okay, but I'll tell you, I was looking at a honeysuckle fruit and it told me it thought it was a cherry. So you do have to have some idea of what you're looking at if you want to get a good result. And I'm sure there are a lot of other
Yep.
apps out there. Um,
And I think you can say the same thing with most of them is that it's good to have some knowledge of plants when you're looking things up so they can help weed out the ones where it's got it wrong.
yeah. And I was going to do a quiz with you all, but we're at time, so I think
Yep.
we'll pass on it. Um, but I do want to show you one last thing. Um, you just got to click through all of here.
I have a couple more questions for you when you're done.
Okay. Um, just some book resources. The Vascular Plants of Wyoming is really great. Textbook of Dendrology, if you're interested in learning more about trees and the study of trees, learning the defining features and trees, the trees around you, even though it's geared towards the Pacific Northwest. Casey Clapp has a Completely Arbitrary is the name of his podcast, but the way he wrote his book, very easy to understand, learning how to identify trees. And most of the trees that we talked about in here are in that book. So it was a really good book to read. Here is that QR code again and the link. So yeah, we went through a lot of information today. My last slide is just saying thank you and asking what questions you have. I'll leave the QR code up, and I'll turn this presentation into a PDF and put that in that Google Drive as well. What can I answer for you?
There's a
In
few more questions, and I think this is one from back when we were talking about the larches. It says, how are they considered conifers if they're deciduous?
well, they are still cone bearing. They just drop their leaves. They're not an evergreen conifer.
So that's one of the defining elements of it is that they have some type of cone.
Yeah.
And then the other question is, are there bald cypress in the state we might collect seed from?
Oh, um, I'm pretty sure. I think there's a bald cypress in Lions Park in Cheyenne.
Check it out.
And I think there might be one up in Sheridan in their arboretum, maybe Newcastle as well.
So Sheridan has a very nice arboretum called the Kendrick Arboretum. If you ever
Yeah.
are around that area and want to swing by and take a look. Plus, a lot of the parks in the town have a lot of awesome trees too. Like to take a wander and look. Well, thank you so much, Tara, this evening for running us through the identification of evergreens and conifers. And I think I set this up so that folks entered their email address when they logged on. So I will look and see if I have those. And if I have them, I will also send out a link to your Google Documents that has a lot of the links that I put in the chat in as well.
Awesome.
That was awesome.
Sorry, my camera stopped working. I tried
And
to
I
turn.
wondered, I thought you're just being shy.
No, I don't know what happened. That might be why my microphone stopped working too.
Yeah, stuff happens.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Oh,
that was great. Thank you
yeah.
all for coming this evening. Hope you learned a lot, and I will hopefully see you on other events in the future. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, everybody.